The thunderous hooves of the stagecoach horses pounded against the dry, cracked earth of the Arizona Territory as Faith Miller clung desperately to her seat, her knuckles white against the worn leather strap. The year was 1885, and her journey west had been nothing short of harrowing. 2,000 miles from her Boston home, she was fleeing a life she could no longer bear, hoping the frontier would offer the freedom she so desperately craved. When the driver finally called out Silvercreek, and the coach lurched to a stop, Faith gathered her few belongings and stepped down onto the dusty main street. The small mining town sprawled before her, a collection of wooden buildings and tents nestled against the rugged backdrop of mountains that seemed to touch the endless blue sky. "Miss, your trunk?" the driver called, already busy unloading the baggage. "Just this," she replied, clutching her carpet bag tightly. Everything she owned in the world was contained in that modest bag, and the trunk being lowered to the ground. Her life had been reduced to these few possessions, but she felt strangely liberated. Faith made her way toward the hotel, a two-story wooden structure that appeared to be the most substantial building in town. The journey had left her exhausted, her blue calico dress coated with a fine layer of dust from the road. She was painfully aware of her disheveled appearance as she approached the front desk. "Room for one, please," she said to the clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. He looked her up and down with undisguised curiosity. "Just arrived in town, madam?" "Yes, just now." She didn't offer more information. The less people knew about her, the better. "That'll be 50 cents a night. We serve breakfast at 6, dinner at 5. Faith paid for 3 nights, though she had no idea how long she would stay in Silvercreek. She needed work, and soon. The money sewn into the lining of her corset wouldn't last forever. The room was sparse but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small window overlooking the main street. Faith washed her face and hands in the tepid water, then sat heavily on the bed. Exhaustion washed over her, but her mind raced with uncertainty. What kind of life could she build here? What kind of work would she find? She had come west following whispers of opportunity, stories of women who had reinvented themselves in these frontier towns. Faith had trained as a teacher back east, but she knew frontier towns often needed someone to teach their children. If not that, then perhaps work in one of the establishments lining the main street. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Faith's stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten since morning. She changed into her second dress, a simple brown cotton that had fared slightly better on the journey, and made her way downstairs to the hotel's small dining room. The room fell momentarily silent as she entered, a dozen pairs of eyes turning to assess the newcomer. Faith lifted her chin and walked to an empty table near the window, ignoring the stares. She was used to being the subject of gossip and speculation, though the reasons were different now. A plump woman with kind eyes approached her table. "Evening, miss. We've got stew tonight. Comes with biscuits and coffee." "That sounds perfect, thank you." As Faith ate, she observed the other diners, mostly men in various states of trail dust and work grime. Miners, she guessed, or ranch hands. A few nodded politely in her direction, but most returned to their meals and conversations once their curiosity was satisfied. By the time she returned to her room, Faith had made a decision. Tomorrow she would speak to someone about teaching positions in the area. If there were none, she would find other work. Whatever happened, she would not return east. That life was behind her now. Morning came with the sounds of the town awakening, wagons rattling down the street, shopkeepers opening their doors, the blacksmith's hammer ringing out. Faith dressed carefully in her blue dress, having brushed away as much dust as possible. She braided her honey-brown hair and pinned it neatly at the nape of her neck, wanting to appear respectable and competent. The hotel clerk directed her to the town's small schoolhouse, a short walk from the main street. To her dismay, she found the building locked, a sign on the door indicating classes would resume in September, nearly 2 months away. Looking for someone? Faith turned to find an elderly woman watching her from the porch of a nearby house. "I was hoping to inquire about teaching positions," Faith explained. The woman's face creased with sympathy. "Oh dear. Mrs. Patterson left for Denver just last month. Her husband struck it rich in the silver mine. The town council hasn't found a replacement yet, but they won't be hiring until August at the earliest." Faith's heart sank. "I see. Thank you for the information. You might try the general store, the woman offered. Mr. Jenkins was saying he needed help, what with his daughter getting married and moving to California. With renewed hope, Faith made her way back to the main street and located Jenkins' General Store, a large establishment that seemed to offer everything from foodstuffs to fabric to mining equipment. A bell jingled as she entered, and a balding man looked up from behind the counter. "Good morning, miss. Something I can help you with?" "I hope so, sir. I was told you might be looking for help in your store." Mr. Jenkins studied her for a moment. "You're new in town?" "Yes, sir. I arrived yesterday from Boston." "Boston, eh? What brings you all the way out here?" Faith had prepared for such questions. "I'm seeking opportunities, sir. I'm educated and have experience keeping accounts." The storekeeper rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Well, I do need someone with a head for figures. Can you start tomorrow? 6 days a week, 8 to 6, $2 a week, plus a room in the back if you need it." Relief flooded through Faith. It wasn't teaching, but it was respectable work with a place to stay. "Yes, sir. I can start tomorrow." "Good. What did you say your name was?" "Faith Miller." "Welcome to Silvercreek, Miss Miller. I'll see you at 8 sharp." Faith left the store with a lighter heart. She had secured employment and lodging within a day of arriving in town. Perhaps this new life would be possible after all. That afternoon, she walked through the town, familiarizing herself with her new home. Silvercreek was larger than it had appeared from the stagecoach. In addition to the main street, there were several side streets lined with small houses and shops. The silver mine that gave the town its name was visible in the distance, its entrance carved into the mountainside. She passed the town's lone church, a saloon already noisy despite the early hour, and what appeared to be a doctor's office. At the edge of town stood a modest ranch house with a large barn and corral behind it. Several horses grazed in a nearby pasture, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. As Faith watched, a tall figure emerged from the barn, leading a magnificent black stallion. Even from a distance, she could tell the man moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this rugged land. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but she could see broad shoulders and the loose-limbed grace of a skilled horseman. The man mounted the stallion in one fluid motion and urged the horse into a gallop across the pasture. Faith found herself standing still, watching horse and rider move as one, an inexplicable tightness in her chest. There was something about the freedom of that gallop that called to something deep inside her. She shook herself from her reverie and continued her walk, returning to the hotel to gather her belongings. Tomorrow she would begin her new life in earnest. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Faith settled into her role at Jenkins' General Store. The work was demanding but satisfying. She organized the chaotic bookkeeping system, implemented a new inventory method, and quickly learned the names and preferences of the store's regular customers. The small room behind the store became her home, simply furnished but private. Faith added small touches to make it her own: a pressed flower in a frame, a colorful quilt purchased from a traveling peddler, books borrowed from Mr. Jenkins's modest library. Slowly, she began to know the townspeople. There was Dr. Wilson, the town's physician, who stopped by the store each morning for coffee and conversation. Mrs. Abernathy, who ran the hotel dining room and brought Faith fresh bread every Sunday. Sheriff Taylor, whose quiet authority kept the peace even on paydays when the miners flooded the saloon. And then there was Wade Reynolds, the rancher she had seen that first day. She learned his name when he came into the store for supplies, tipping his hat politely as Mr. Jenkins introduced them. Up close, his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and Faith found herself uncharacteristically tongue-tied. "Miss Miller's our new clerk," Mr. Jenkins explained. "Come all the way from Boston to join us." "Boston's loss is Silvercreek's gain," Wade said with a slight smile that made Faith's cheeks warm. After that, Wade came into the store more frequently, sometimes for supplies, sometimes just to pass the time in conversation. Faith learned that his ranch, the Double R, was one of the most successful in the area, specializing in breeding and training quarter horses. He had inherited it from his father 5 years earlier and expanded it considerably. "My pa always said a man's only as good as his word and his horse," he told her one quiet afternoon as she measured out coffee beans for him. Out here, that's the truth. Faith found herself looking forward to his visits. enjoying their conversations that ranged from books they had both read to the challenges of frontier life. Wade was unlike any man she had known in Boston, straightforward, unrefined in some ways, but intelligent and thoughtful. Summer progressed, the days growing hotter. Faith adapted to the rhythm of frontier life, rising with the sun and working until dusk. On Sundays, her one day off, she sometimes joined other townspeople at church or simply walked in the hills surrounding the town, reveling in the vast open spaces so different from the crowded streets of Boston. It was on one such Sunday, nearly 2 months after her arrival in Silvercreek, that Faith's carefully constructed new life began to crack. She was returning from a solitary walk when she noticed a stagecoach stopping in front of the hotel, unusual for a Sunday. A well-dressed man stepped down, speaking animatedly with the driver while pointing at something. Faith instinctively stepped into the shadow of the mercantile, her heart racing. The man's profile was unmistakable. Richard Blackwell, her former fiancé's business partner. Had he come looking for her? How had he found her? Faith waited until Richard entered the hotel before hurrying back to her room behind the store, her mind whirling with possibilities, none of them good. She had hoped her past would never catch up with her. After discovering her fiancé Edward's illegal business dealings and his violent temper when she confronted him, Faith had fled Boston, taking only what she could carry and the evidence of his crimes she had discovered. Edward had threatened to find her, to silence her permanently rather than risk his reputation and freedom. Now Richard's presence confirmed her worst fears. They had tracked her to Silvercreek. She needed to leave, immediately, before Richard found her. Faith quickly packed her few belongings into her carpet bag, tears blurring her vision. Just when she had begun to feel at home, to feel safe, her past had found her. She wrote a hasty note to Mr. Jenkins, thanking him for his kindness and apologizing for her sudden departure. Then she slipped out the back door into the alley, planning to make her way to the livery stable where she could hire a horse or perhaps find passage on a freight wagon. As Faith hurried down the alley, keeping to the shadows, she collided with a solid figure turning the corner. "Whoa there," said a familiar voice, strong hands steadying her shoulders. "Miss Miller?" "Faith." She looked up into Wade Reynolds' concerned face, her own pale with fear. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately sensing her distress. "Are you ill?" "I have to leave," she whispered, glancing fearfully toward the main street. "Please, I can't explain now." Wade's expression grew serious as he took in her carpetbag and frightened eyes. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" A shout from the direction of the hotel made Faith flinch. "Is that her? The woman in the blue dress?" "Please," she begged Wade. "I need to get away from here." Without hesitation, Wade took her carpetbag in one hand and her elbow with the other. "This way," he said, guiding her toward the back of the alley where his horse was tethered. "My ranch is 3 miles outside town. You'll be safe there until we figure this out." Faith didn't have time to consider the impropriety of going alone to a man's home. All she knew was that she trusted Wade Reynolds more than anyone else in Silvercreek, and right now she needed to disappear. Wade helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he urged the animal into a trot. As they left the town behind, Faith felt herself trembling, both from fear and from the unaccustomed proximity to Wade's solid presence at her back. "Whoever you're running from," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear, "they'll have to go through me to get to you." The simple declaration nearly undid her composure. How long had it been since anyone had offered to protect her, to stand between her and danger? They rode in silence across the open country, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Faith gradually relaxed against Wade's chest, drawing strength from his steady presence. The Double R Ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a substantial main house, with several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where horses grazed. Wade guided his horse to the house and dismounted, then reached up to help Faith down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met in a moment of shared awareness before he stepped back. "Come inside," he said, retrieving her carpetbag. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, will be preparing supper. You can rest, and when you're ready, we can talk." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture, colorful woven rugs, and bookshelves lining one wall of the main room. A plump, gray-haired woman appeared from what Faith assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Garcia, this is Miss Faith Miller from town," Wade said. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Can you prepare the guest room?" The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded without comment. "Supper will be ready in an hour, Mr. Reynolds." Once Mrs. Garcia had gone upstairs, Wade gestured for Faith to sit on the sofa near the fireplace. "Now," he said, taking a seat opposite her, "I think it's time you told me what's got you running scared." Faith hesitated, twisting her hands in her lap. She had kept her secrets close for so long, but Wade had risked helping her without knowing why, and she owed him the truth. "I came to Silvercreek to escape my former fiancé," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Edward Blackwell was one of Boston's most respected businessmen. We were to be married this summer." Wade listened intently as Faith recounted how she had discovered documents in Edward's study revealing his involvement in a scheme to defraud investors, including many elderly widows who had entrusted their life savings to his company. When she had confronted him, his charming facade had crumbled, revealing a violent temper that left her with bruises and a newfound fear of the man she had agreed to marry. "I took some of the documents proving his crimes," Faith continued, her voice strengthening with resolve. "I intended to take them to the authorities, but Edward's partner Richard found me before I could. He made it clear that if I went to the police, I wouldn't live to testify." Wade's expression darkened with anger. "And this Richard is the man who arrived in town today?" Faith nodded. "I don't know how they found me. I was so careful. What will they do if they catch you?" "Take back the evidence." And then, she couldn't finish the sentence, but Wade understood. "These documents," he said, leaning forward. "Do you still have them?" "Yes. They're sewn into the lining of my trunk at the hotel." Faith's eyes widened in alarm. "My trunk. I left it behind." "We'll get it back," Wade assured her. "But first, we need to make sure you're safe. No one knows you're here, and no one will find you. The double R is my kingdom, and I say who crosses its borders." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed something inside Faith that had been cold with fear for too long. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she felt truly safe. Mrs. Garcia called them to supper, a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Despite her anxiety, Faith found herself hungry, and the normalcy of sitting at a table sharing a meal helped calm her nerves. Afterward, Mrs. Garcia showed Faith to the guest room, a pleasant chamber with a brass bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the pastures. The housekeeper provided a nightgown and robe, explaining that they had belonged to Wade's late mother. "Mr. Reynolds doesn't bring visitors here often," Mrs. Garcia said as she turned down the bed. "Especially not young ladies." Her tone was matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "He's been very kind," Faith replied, uncertain how to explain her presence. Mrs. Garcia's weathered face softened. "He's a good man, like his father before him." She paused at the door. "Whatever trouble you're in, Miss Miller, you've found a good protector in Wade Reynolds." Left alone, Faith changed into the borrowed nightgown and sat in the rocking chair, watching the stars appear in the vast sky above the ranch. The events of the day had left her exhausted but too tense to sleep. Her mind kept returning to the moment Wade had found her in the alley, how quickly he had chosen to help her without knowing her secrets. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Faith, are you still awake?" Wade's voice was low. She opened the door to find him standing there, hat in hand, his expression concerned. "I wanted to check if you needed anything," he said, his eyes carefully avoiding the sight of her in his mother's nightgown and robe. "And to let you know I've sent my ranch hand Tomas into town to keep an eye on things and retrieve your trunk if possible." "Thank you," Faith said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Wade shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. I couldn't leave you in danger." He hesitated, then added, "We'll figure this out together, Faith. I promise." The way he said her name, with such gentle assurance, made her heart beat faster. "Good night, Wade." "Good night. Try to rest. You're safe here." As Faith closed the door, she realized that somehow, in the space of a few hours, this ranch had become a sanctuary, and the man who owned it had become her unexpected champion. Morning brought a clear sky and the sounds of the ranch awakening, horses nickering, roosters crowing, the distant lowing of cattle. Faith, dressed in her blue calico dress, now somewhat wrinkled from being hastily packed, and made her way downstairs. She found Wade in the kitchen, talking with a young Mexican man who she assumed was Tomas. They fell silent when she entered, and Wade pulled out a chair for her at the table. "Faith, this is Tomas Ramirez, my foreman," Wade said. "Tomas, Miss Faith Miller." The young man nodded respectfully. "Señorita, Mr. Reynolds has told me of your situation. Tomas went into town last night," Wade explained, pouring her a cup of coffee. "He's brought news, and your trunk." Faith's eyes widened. "You retrieved my trunk? How?" Tomas grinned. "The hotel clerk knows me. I said Mr. Reynolds had sent me to collect the belongings of his cousin who had arrived unexpectedly at the ranch. The men looking for you spent the evening questioning people in town." Wade continued more seriously. "They visited the store, and Jenkins told them you had left suddenly. They're offering a reward for information on your whereabouts." Faith's hands trembled, rattling the coffee cup against its saucer. "They won't give up easily." "Neither will we," Wade said firmly. "I've been thinking about our options. The documents you took, they're evidence of serious crimes." "Yes. Fraud, embezzlement, possibly worse. Then our best move is to get that evidence to the proper authorities. Not the local sheriff, he's a good man. But this is beyond his jurisdiction. We need to reach the federal marshal in Tucson." Tomas nodded in agreement. "I can take her there, boss. 2 days hard riding." "No," Wade said, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll take her myself. Tomas, you'll stay here and run things. If anyone comes looking, you know nothing about any Boston lady." Faith looked between the two men, overwhelmed by their willingness to help her. "I can't ask you to risk yourselves this way." Wade's blue eyes met hers across the table. "You didn't ask. I'm offering. These men threatened your life, Faith. That's not something I can ignore." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. There was something in the way he looked at her, something beyond concern for a friend or neighbor, that stirred feelings she had thought herself incapable of after Edward's betrayal. "When do we leave?" she asked softly. "Tomorrow at dawn. Today we'll prepare. I need to show you how to ride properly. It's a hard journey to Tucson." After breakfast, Faith changed into a borrowed pair of trousers and a shirt that had belonged to Wade's younger brother, now living in California. The clothing felt scandalously improper, but Wade insisted it was necessary for the long ride ahead. "No one ever tamed the frontier in a corset and petticoats," he said with a grin as he led her to the corral where a gentle mare was saddled and waiting. Faith had ridden before, but only side saddle in Boston's parks. Wade patiently taught her to mount properly, to hold the reins correctly, to move with the horse rather than against it. His hands were sure and respectful as he adjusted her posture, and Faith found herself hyper-aware of each brief contact. "You're a natural," he said approvingly as she guided the mare around the corral. "By tomorrow, you'll be ready for the trail." They practiced throughout the morning, taking breaks when Faith's unused muscles protested. During one such rest, sitting in the shade of an oak tree near the corral, Wade asked about her life before Boston. "I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts," Faith told him. "My father was the local doctor, my mother a teacher. They believed in education for women, quite progressive for their time." "Is that why you came west?" "To teach." "Partly." Faith plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "After my parents died influenza, 3 years ago, I moved to Boston to live with my aunt. That's where I met Edward." She hesitated, then continued. "I was alone, and he was charming, successful. I thought he loved me." Wade's expression darkened. "Men like that don't know what love is." "No," Faith agreed softly. "I see that now." She looked up at him curiously. "What about you? Have you always lived here?" A shadow crossed Wade's face. "Born and raised on the Double R. My father built this place from nothing. My mother died when I was 12. My brother William was just 8. Pa raised us alone, taught us everything about ranching, about being men. He sounds like a remarkable man. He was." Wade's voice held both pride and grief. "Died 5 years ago. Heart gave out while he was breaking a new stallion. William left for California not long after the ranch life wasn't for him. He's got a law practice in San Francisco now." "So you've been running the Double R alone all this time?" Wade nodded. his gaze sweeping over the pastures and buildings of his ranch. Not alone exactly. Got good people working for me. But yes, it's my responsibility now. Faith heard the weight of that responsibility in his voice, but also the pride and love he had for this land. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. I can see why you stay. He turned to look at her, something unreadable in his eyes. I never thought of leaving. This is home. He paused, then added quietly, though it gets lonely sometimes. The simple admission touched Faith deeply. In that moment, she saw not just the capable rancher, but the man beneath one who carried his burdens with quiet strength, who had opened his home and risked his safety for a woman he barely knew. Before she could respond, Tomas called from the house that lunch was ready. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding taking root. That afternoon, Wade showed Faith the route they would take to Tucson, tracing the path on a map spread across the dining table. They would avoid the main roads, taking instead a series of lesser-known trails through the hills. It's longer this way, he explained, but less chance of running into trouble. We'll camp one night, reach Tucson the second day. Faith's trunk had been brought to her room, and after dinner, she carefully extracted the documents hidden in its lining. Wade examined them with a grim expression, understanding enough of the legal terminology to recognize the severity of the crimes they revealed. This is damning evidence, he said, returning the papers to Faith. No wonder they're so desperate to get it back. And to silence me, Faith added quietly. I'm the only one who can testify about finding these in Edward's study. Wade's jaw tightened. That's not going to happen. I promise you, Faith. That night, as Faith prepared for bed, she found herself both anxious about the journey ahead and strangely exhilarated. For months she had been running, hiding, looking over her shoulder. Now, with Wade's help, she was finally taking a stand against Edward's threats. And if she was honest with herself, there was another reason for her racing heart. In the span of a day, her feelings for Wade Reynolds had deepened from friendship into something more complicated. His unwavering support, his quiet strength, the tenderness beneath his rugged exterior, all of it called to her in ways she had never experienced with Edward or any man before him. Dawn came early, the first golden rays of sun just beginning to touch the eastern horizon as Faith and Wade prepared to depart. They dressed in practical clothing for the journey, Faith again in borrowed trousers and a shirt, with a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the sun. The incriminating documents were securely wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into Wade's saddlebags. Mrs. Garcia provided them with food for the journey: jerky, hardtack, dried fruit, and canteens of water. Tomas helped saddle the horses the gentle mare Faith had practiced on and Wade's favorite stallion. Remember, Wade instructed his foreman, if anyone comes asking, you haven't seen any woman from Boston. I've gone to Apache Wells to look at a breeding stallion. Tomas nodded solemnly. Be careful, boss. Vaya con Dios. With final adjustments to their gear, Wade helped Faith mount her horse, then swung easily onto his own. The rising sun cast long shadows as they rode away from the ranch, heading southwest toward the distant mountains that separated them from Tucson. They rode at a steady pace, Wade occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the land they passed through. Faith was grateful for his efforts to distract her from the discomfort of the saddle and the anxiety about what lay ahead. By midday, they had covered significant ground, stopping to rest the horses and eat a simple meal beside a small stream. Faith stretched her sore muscles, trying not to wince as she sat on a fallen log. Wade noticed her discomfort. First day's always the hardest, he said sympathetically. You're doing well, though. Better than most city folk on their first long ride. I'm determined, Faith replied with a small smile. And I have a good teacher. As they continued their journey that afternoon, the terrain became more rugged, the trail narrowing as it wound through rocky hills. Wade led the way, occasionally looking back to check on Faith, offering encouragement when the path grew difficult. Late in the day, with the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Wade guided them to a sheltered canyon where a small spring provided fresh water. We'll camp here for the night, he said, dismounting and helping Faith down from her horse. Faith's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and Wade's strong hands steadied her, lingering at her waist. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to still around them. Thank you, Faith said softly, not just for the assistance but for everything he had done. Wade nodded, something unspoken passing between them before he turned to care for the horses. They worked together to set up Camp Wade, building a small fire while Faith spread the bedrolls he had brought. The domesticity of the tasks, performed in the vast wilderness with only each other for company, created an intimacy that was both unexpected and strangely comfortable. As night fell, they sat by the fire eating the provisions Mrs. Garcia had packed. The stars emerged overhead, more brilliant than Faith had ever seen them. "It's beautiful," she breathed, gazing up at the canopy of stars. In Boston, the city lights obscure most of the stars. "I've never seen so many." Wade followed her gaze upward. "My father taught me the constellations when I was a boy. Said a man could always find his way home if he knew the stars. He pointed out patterns in the sky, naming them one by one: the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, the North Star." Faith listened, entranced not just by the stars but by the gentle cadence of Wade's voice, the way the firelight played across his features, softening the lines etched by sun and wind. "What will you do?" he asked suddenly. "After Tucson, I mean. After you've given your evidence to the marshal." The question caught Faith off guard. She had been so focused on escaping Edward and bringing him to justice that she hadn't thought much beyond that goal. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I can't go back to Boston. Perhaps I'll find a teaching position somewhere. Start over again." "You could come back to Silvercreek," Wade suggested, his eyes on the fire rather than on her face. "Jenkins would take you back at the store in a heartbeat. Or the school will need a teacher come fall." The thought of returning to the small town that had briefly been her home filled Faith with unexpected longing. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I was beginning to feel at home there." Wade looked up then, meeting her gaze across the fire. "You'd be welcome. The town needs good people like you." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I'd make sure you were safe." The simple declaration touched something deep inside Faith. In Edward, she had seen only the facade of protection: the wealthy man who could provide a comfortable life, the respected businessman whose name would shield her from hardship. But in Wade, she saw true protection, not because of his standing or wealth, but because of the kind of man he was. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, needing to understand. "You barely know me, yet you've risked so much." Wade was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "When I first saw you in town," he finally said, "something about you caught my attention. Not just that you were pretty, though you are, but something in the way you carried yourself. Like you were bearing up under a weight, but refusing to be bowed by it." He looked up at her, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then I got to know you at the store. Your kindness to everyone, your intelligence, the way you never complained about the hard work or the heat or any of the things that drive most Easterners back home within a month." Faith found herself unable to look away from his earnest gaze. "When I found you in that alley yesterday, looking so frightened," Wade continued, "I knew I couldn't let anyone hurt you. It wasn't even a choice, Faith. It was just what had to be done." The simple honesty of his words moved her more than any flowery declaration ever could have. This was a man who spoke truth, who lived by a code of honor that had nothing to do with social standing or wealth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for seeing me, the real me." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the canyon walls. In that moment, Faith realized that somewhere in the past 2 months, without her noticing, Wade Reynolds had become important to her in ways she hadn't thought possible after Edward's betrayal. As the night deepened, they reluctantly prepared for sleep, spreading their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Despite her exhaustion, Faith found sleep elusive, her mind filled with thoughts of the man sleeping just a few feet away and the uncertain future that awaited them in Tucson. Dawn broke clear and cool, with a light mist hanging in the canyon. Faith awoke to find Wade already up, tending the horses and rekindling the fire for coffee. He smiled when he saw her watching him, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made her heart beat faster. "Sleep well?" he asked, pouring coffee into a tin cup for her. "Better than I expected," Faith replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "Though everything aches this morning." Wade chuckled. "That's normal. Second day is always worse than the first. But we should reach Tucson by nightfall if we make good time." They broke camp quickly, eager to be on their way. As Wade helped Faith mount her horse, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met in a moment of shared awareness before he stepped back. The trail that day took them through increasingly rough country narrow paths winding between towering rock formations, steep descents into dry washes, climbs up rocky slopes. Wade led the way, occasionally dismounting to help Faith navigate particularly difficult sections. By midday, the sun was beating down mercilessly, and they stopped in the shade of a large outcropping to rest the horses and eat. Faith's muscles protested every movement, but she refused to complain, determined to match Wade's endurance. "You're doing well," he said approvingly as they shared jerky and hardtack. Most city folk would be begging to turn back by now. Faith smiled, pleased by his praise. "I'm discovering I'm stronger than I thought. I knew that from the first time I met you," Wade replied, his expression serious. "It takes courage to leave everything behind and start over in a place like Silvercreek. Most women wouldn't have the fortitude." "Most women haven't had the motivation I did," Faith said wryly. Wade's expression darkened. "This man, Edward, he didn't deserve you. No man who raises his hand to a woman deserves her." "I know that now," Faith said quietly, "though I sometimes wonder if I should have seen the signs earlier. If I was blind to his true nature because I was so eager to belong somewhere after my parents died." Wade was silent for a moment, then said, "We all make mistakes, Faith. What matters is learning from them. And you did more than that. You're bringing him to justice, not just running away." His understanding, free of judgment or condescension, meant more to Faith than he could know. Edward had often made her feel foolish for her opinions or concerns, subtly undermining her confidence. Wade, in contrast, treated her as an equal, valuing her thoughts and respecting her decisions. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain gradually changing as they descended toward the valley where Tucson lay. The distant smudge of the town appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, a welcome sight after 2 days of hard riding. "We'll make it before dark," Wade said, pointing toward the growing outline of buildings. "The marshal's office is near the center of town." As they rode the final miles toward Tucson, Faith felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that their journey was nearly complete, anxiety about confronting her past through the evidence she carried, and a growing sadness at the thought that her time with Wade would soon end. The outskirts of Tucson appeared before them, scattered houses and small farms, giving way to more densely packed buildings as they approached the town proper. After the isolation of their journey, the sight of people moving about the streets, the sounds of wagons and voices, felt almost overwhelming to Faith. Wade guided them to a modest hotel near the center of town. "We'll get rooms here," he said, helping Faith dismount. "Rest, clean up, and then visit the marshal in the morning when we're fresh." The hotel clerk raised his eyebrows slightly at Faith's attire, but asked no questions as Wade requested 2 rooms. Once settled in her room, Faith gratefully stripped off her dusty clothing and used the pitcher of water provided to wash away the grime of travel. The simple white nightgown she unpacked from her trunk felt luxurious after 2 days in borrowed men's clothing. A knock at her door announced the arrival of a hot meal sent up by Wade. Faith ate hungrily, then fell into the bed, exhaustion claiming her almost immediately. Morning came with the sounds of Tucson awakening, wagons on the street below, merchants opening their shops, the distant whistle of a train. Faith dressed carefully in one of her few remaining clean dresses, a simple blue calico that had survived the journey relatively unwrinkled. She braided her hair and pinned it neatly, wanting to appear respectable and credible when they met with the marshal. Wade was waiting in the hotel dining room, freshly shaven and dressed in a clean shirt and vest. His eyes warmed appreciatively as Faith approached. "You look lovely," he said simply, standing to pull out her chair. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself," Faith replied with a smile, noting how the fresh shirt emphasized the blue of his eyes. Over breakfast, they discussed their approach for meeting with the marshal. The documents were secure in Wade's inside vest pocket, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them. "Let me do the initial talking," Wade suggested. "Marshal Davis and I have crossed paths before. Nothing serious, just ranch business. He's a fair man, but cautious with strangers." Faith nodded, grateful for Wade's guidance. I'm ready to tell him everything. About finding the documents, about Edward's threats. All of it. The marshal's office was a solid brick building on the main street, with the territorial jail attached at the rear. Marshal James Davis proved to be a lean, gray-haired man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened carefully as Wade introduced Faith and explained the general nature of their visit. Financial crimes and threats from Boston, you say? The marshal gestured for them to sit. That's federal territory, Miss Miller. You'd better start at the beginning. For the next hour, Faith recounted her story, her engagement to Edward Blackwell, the discovery of the fraudulent documents, Edward's violent reaction, her flight west, and the pursuit that had followed her to Silvercreek. Wade added details about the men searching for her in town, the reward they had offered for information. Marshal Davis examined the documents with a furrowed brow, occasionally asking questions about specific details. Finally, he looked up at Faith with a serious expression. This is serious business, Miss Miller. These papers show a pattern of fraud that's ruined a lot of people. You did right bringing them to me. He leaned back in his chair. I'll telegraph the federal authorities in Boston today. They'll want to question you, of course. Will she need to return to Boston? Wade asked, concern evident in his voice. The marshal considered. Not immediately. I can take your formal statement here, Miss Miller. When they arrest Blackwell and his partner, you may need to testify at the trial, but that could be months away. Relief flooded through Faith. She had feared being forced to return east immediately, to face Edward before he was in custody. What about the men looking for her in Silvercreek? Wade pressed. I'll send deputies up there today, Marshal Davis assured them. If these men are still in the area, we'll find them. In the meantime, I suggest you both stay in Tucson for a few days until we know more. They spent the rest of the morning at the marshal's office as Faith gave her formal statement, describing in detail how she had found the documents and what she knew of Edward's business dealings. By the time they finished, it was past noon, and Faith felt emotionally drained but lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. You did well, Wade said as they walked back toward the hotel. Brave and clear-headed. The marshal was impressed. Faith smiled, warmed by his praise. It feels strange, knowing it's finally out of my hands. I've been carrying this secret for so long. You're free of it now, Wade said, his eyes meeting hers. Free to start fresh. That evening, they dined together in the hotel restaurant, celebrating the successful meeting with the marshal. Wade ordered a bottle of wine, a luxury neither had indulged in for some time. To justice, he said, raising his glass to Faith. And to new beginnings, she added, touching her glass to his. As they ate, they spoke of lighter matters, Wade's plans for expanding his horse breeding operation, Faith's hope of securing a teaching position. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by shared laughter and moments when their eyes met over the table, communicating something deeper than words could express. The marshal suggested we stay in Tucson a few days, Wade said as they finished their meal. I need to send word to Tomas about the delay. I'm sorry to keep you from your ranch for so long, Faith said, genuinely concerned. You've already done so much for me. Wade reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I'm exactly where I want to be, Faith. The simple touch, the warmth in his voice, sent a flutter through Faith's chest. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that her feelings for Wade Reynolds had grown far beyond friendship or gratitude. The next 3 days passed in a pleasant haze as they explored Tucson together, waiting for news from the marshal. They visited the town's small museum, attended a local theater production, and spent hours simply walking the streets, talking and enjoying each other's company away from the pressures that had brought them together. On the afternoon of the third day, Marshal Davis summoned them to his office, his expression serious but satisfied. Got a telegram from Boston, he announced without preamble. Federal agents arrested Edward Blackwell and Richard Blackwell yesterday morning. They found additional evidence in Edward's home that corroborates your documents, Miss Miller. They're both being held without bail. Faith felt tears spring to her eyes, tears of relief, of vindication, of the knowledge that the men who had threatened her were finally facing justice. When will I need to testify? She asked, her voice steady despite her emotion. Not for several months, at least, the marshal replied. The prosecutor will contact you when the time comes. Until then, You're free to go about your life." He paused, then added, "Those men who were looking for you in Silvercreek? My deputies found them trying to leave the territory. They're in custody now, charged with conspiracy and attempted kidnapping." Wade's hand found Faith's, squeezing gently in shared relief. "Thank you, Marshal," Faith said sincerely. "For everything. Just doing my job, Miss Miller." The Marshal's stern expression softened slightly. "Not many women would have had the courage to do what you did. You should be proud." As they left the Marshal's office, Wade suggested a celebratory dinner at Tucson's finest restaurant. "And tomorrow," he added, "we can head back to Silvercreek. If you still want to return, that is." Faith stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turning to face him. "Do you want me to return?" Wade looked down at her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "More than anything," he admitted softly, "these past few days with you. Faith, I've never met anyone like you. Strong, brave, kind." Faith's heart raced at his words, at the tenderness in his eyes. "I want to return," she whispered, "to Silvercreek, to the life I was building there." She hesitated, then added, "To you, Wade." His smile then was like the sun breaking through clouds, transforming his weather-worn face with joy. Heedless of the curious glances from passers-by, Wade took Faith's hands in his. "I know it's sudden," he said, his voice low and earnest. "We've only known each other a short time, but I feel like I've known you forever, Faith. These past days together have shown me what I want for my future, and that's a future with you in it." Faith felt tears gather in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming happiness. "I feel the same," she confessed. "After Edward, I thought I'd never trust a man again, never believe in love. But you showed me what real strength is, what real care looks like." Wade's thumb brushed gently across her cheek, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "I'm falling in love with you, Faith Miller," he said simply. "And I'd be honored if you'd consider making Silvercreek and maybe someday the Double are your permanent home." Faith's heart soared at his words. "I'm falling in love with you too, Wade Reynolds," she replied, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "And nothing would make me happier than to build a life in Silvercreek with you." Their return journey to Silvercreek was filled with a newfound joy, the shared secret of their blossoming love, making even the hardest parts of the trail seem easier. They spoke of the future, of possibilities, of dreams long held private now shared in the vast openness of the Arizona wilderness. When they arrived at the Double R, Tomas greeted them with news that the town was buzzing with the story of the Boston criminals and Faith's role in bringing them to justice. Mr. Jenkins had saved her position at the store, and the town council had inquired whether she might consider taking the teaching position in the fall. "Seems you're quite the celebrity, Miss Miller," Tomas said with a grin. Faith laughed, glancing at Wade. "I'm just looking forward to a normal life now. As normal as life gets in Silvercreek," Wade replied with a smile, his hand finding hers. In the weeks that followed, Faith settled back into life in the small frontier town, dividing her time between work at the general store and preparing for her new role as the town's teacher. She took a room at the hotel again, though she spent most of her free time at the Double R, riding with Wade, helping Mrs. Garcia in the kitchen, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. Their courtship progressed with the straightforward honesty that characterized everything about Wade. He courted her properly, taking her to Sunday socials, escorting her to church, bringing her wildflowers gathered during his rides across the ranch. The townspeople watched with approving smiles as the confirmed bachelor rancher and the brave Eastern lady grew visibly closer week by week. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch of the Double R watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Wade turned to Faith with unusual seriousness. "I've been thinking," he began, taking her hand in his. Faith smiled encouragingly. "About what?" "About us. About the future." He shifted slightly, suddenly seeming nervous despite his usual confidence. "Faith, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought something to the Double R and to me that I never knew was missing." Faith's heart began to race as Wade reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "Pa gave it to me before he died. Said I should save it for the woman who captured my heart the way Ma captured his." He slid from the porch swing to kneel before her, still holding her hand. "Faith Miller, I love you. Your strength, your kindness, your courage, everything about you. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy filled Faith's eyes as she looked at this man who had become her protector, her friend, and now her love. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Wade Reynolds. I would be proud to be your wife." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, sealing their engagement with a tender kiss. They were married on a crisp October day, with the aspen trees turning gold in the mountains surrounding Silvercreek. The whole town turned out for the wedding, held in the small church with its simple wooden pews and altar decorated with wildflowers. Faith wore a new dress of pale blue silk ordered specially from Tucson, with her mother's lace veil that she had carried all the way from Boston. Wade waited for her at the altar, his usual rancher's attire replaced by a new black suit, his expression one of awe and adoration as she walked toward him on the arm of Dr. Wilson, who had agreed to give her away. Tomas stood proudly as Wade's best man, while Mrs. Abernathy from the hotel had insisted on being Faith's matron of honor. As they exchanged their vows, Faith thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, the fear and heartbreak in Boston, the long flight west, the unexpected sanctuary she had found in Silvercreek, and the love that had blossomed with this remarkable man who now promised to cherish her for all their days. The celebration afterward was held at the Double R, the ranch house and yard transformed with lanterns and bunting. The townspeople danced and feasted well into the night, celebrating not just the union of two people they had come to respect and love, but the triumph of justice and the promise of new beginnings. Later that night, as Faith and Wade stood alone on the porch of what was now their home, she leaned her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never thought possible. "Happy, Mrs. Reynolds?" Wade asked softly, his arm tightening around her waist. "Completely," Faith replied, looking up at him with a smile. "Though I still can't quite believe how much my life has changed since I stepped off that stagecoach covered in dust and fear." Wade's expression grew tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I remember the first time I really saw you, at the store. Your dress was dusty from restocking the flour barrels, and you had a smudge on your cheek." His voice deepened with emotion. "I thought then that you were the prettiest thing I'd ever seen." Faith laughed softly at the memory. "I was mortified to be caught looking so disheveled by the handsome rancher everyone in town spoke of with such respect." "I loved your determination," Wade continued. "The way you held your head high despite everything. I think I started falling in love with you that very day." Faith reached up to touch his cheek, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. "From Boston society to a ranch wife in the Arizona territory," she mused. "My parents would be surprised, but I think they would approve. They always wanted me to find true happiness." "And have you?" Wade asked, a rare hint of vulnerability in his voice. "More than I ever dreamed possible," Faith assured him, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "This is where I belong, Wade. With you, at the Double R, building our life together." As they stood embraced in the moonlight, Faith knew with absolute certainty that all the hardship, all the fear, all the difficult choices had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a man who saw her true worth, in a place where she could be her authentic self, in a life built on love, respect, and shared dreams. 5 years later, Faith stood on the porch of the Double R, watching as Wade taught their 4-year-old son William to sit properly on his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter Eleanor clung to Faith's skirts, her blue eyes so like her father's wide with excitement as she watched her brother. "Mama, look at me," William called proudly as he sat straight in the small saddle, his father's hand steadying him. "I see you, sweetheart," Faith called back with a smile. "You're doing wonderfully." The Double R had prospered in the years since their marriage. Wade's breeding program had gained recognition throughout the territory, bringing buyers from as far away as California and Texas. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and a proper schoolhouse had been built in town, where Faith taught 3 days a week, while Mrs. Garcia helped care for the children. Faith had testified at Edward Blackwell's trial in Denver 2 years after her marriage, Wade steadfastly by her side. Edward and Richard had both received lengthy prison sentences, and the money they had stolen was gradually being returned to their victims. The experience had given Faith final closure on that chapter of her life, allowing her to fully embrace her future without the shadows of the past. As the lesson concluded, Wade lifted William from the pony and set him on the ground, ruffling his dark hair affectionately. The boy ran toward the house, eager to tell his mother about his achievement, while Wade led the pony back toward the barn. "Mama, Papa says I'm a natural horseman," William announced breathlessly as he reached the porch. "Of course you are," Faith replied, bending to hug him. "You're a Reynolds, after all." Eleanor tugged at her mother's skirt. "Me ride too, Mama." Faith laughed, lifting her daughter into her arms. "When you're a little bigger, sweetheart, just like your brother." Wade joined them on the porch, his smile warming as he took in the sight of his family. At 35, he was in his prime, the years adding character to his handsome face rather than diminishing it. The responsibility of family had softened some of his rougher edges while strengthening his natural protectiveness. "What do you think, Mrs. Reynolds?" he asked, wrapping an arm around Faith's waist. "Will we have a dynasty of horse breeders?" Faith leaned into his embrace, contentment washing over her. "I think we'll have children who know they're loved and supported in whatever they choose," she replied, "just as their father has always loved and supported their mother." Wade's expression grew tender as he gazed down at her. "Best decision I ever made, helping that frightened woman in the alley that day. Even though she came to you with dirt on her dress?" Faith teased, remembering how disheveled she had been during their flight from Silvercreek. Wade's blue eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, his voice deepening with emotion. "It was still the prettiest thing I'd ever seen," he said softly, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness that had first won her heart all those years ago. As the Arizona sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Faith Reynolds looked at the life she had built with the man she loved, the children they had created together, the home they had made, the future they continued to shape day by day. From the ashes of fear and betrayal had risen a life more beautiful and fulfilling than she could ever have imagined on that long-ago day when she had stepped off the stagecoach into Silvercreek, alone and afraid. She had come west seeking escape and had found instead her destiny in a small frontier town, on a ranch nestled against the mountains, and in the arms of a cowboy who had seen beyond the dust and fear to the woman beneath, and had loved her for exactly who she was.